The chains were already around her wrists when Elena understood what was happening. Cold metal bit into her skin, and the strange burning sensation told her it was lined with silver. She stumbled through the snow, dragged by a firm hand that did not care whether she fell. Her breath came out in short white clouds. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Corvin, stop," she said, her voice shaking. "Tell me what is happening. Where is Damien?" Corvin did not slow down. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the dark tree line ahead, where the pack territory ended and the wild, unclaimed land began. Snow fell steadily around them, catching in his hair, settling on his shoulders like a false calm. "The Alpha has made his decision," Corvin said flatly. "You are no longer welcome within these borders." Elena's stomach turned to ice, colder than the wind biting at her face. "That cannot be true. Damien would never do this. Not without speaking to me first." "He has heard enough," Corvin said. "Enough lies. Enough excuses." She wanted to scream that there had been no lies, that whatever Corvin had told the Alpha was false, twisted, poisoned by something she did not yet understand. But the cold had already stolen some of her strength, and the chains sapped the rest. Silver did that to wolves. It did not just burn the skin. It reached deeper, dimming the fire that lived inside every shifter, the fire that let them heal, that let them run fast and fight hard. Without it, Elena was nothing more than a frightened woman, stumbling through snow in a thin coat, her hand instinctively moving to rest over her stomach. She was 7 months pregnant, and no one but her knew it. She had kept it hidden carefully, wrapping herself in looser clothes, staying out of sight during the hours when the pack gathered, telling herself she needed just a little more time before revealing the truth to Damien. She had wanted the announcement to be perfect. She had wanted to see his face light up the way it did, when something truly moved him, not clouded by pack business, or elder politics, or the endless demands placed on an Alpha's shoulders. Now she wondered if she would ever get the chance. "Corvin, please," she said, forcing the words past the tightness in her throat. "Whatever you told him, it isn't true. I have never betrayed this pack. I have never betrayed Damien." For a moment, something flickered across Corvin's face. Not guilt. Something colder. Satisfaction, maybe. The look of a man watching a plan unfold exactly as he intended. "You should have thought about that before meeting with Cale Ashgrove," he said. Elena's mind raced back, trying to place the name, and then it struck her. Cale Ashgrove was the emissary from the Redthorn pack, a rival territory that had clashed with Blackthorn more than once over hunting grounds and old grudges. She had never met privately with him. She had spoken to him exactly once, briefly, in front of at least a dozen witnesses, during a treaty negotiation months ago. It had lasted less than 5 minutes. "That meeting was public," she said. "Damien was there. The elders were there. You know that isn't what happened." "I know what I saw," Corvin said, his voice hardening. "And I know what the Alpha was shown." Shown, not told, shown. The word sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the weather. Someone had fabricated something. Evidence, perhaps. A forged letter. A staged sighting. Something convincing enough to turn Damien's trust to ash in a matter of hours. She thought of the way Damien's mood had shifted these past weeks, the tension in his shoulders whenever she entered a room, the way his eyes sometimes lingered on her with something she had mistaken for exhaustion but now understood might have been suspicion. Someone had been poisoning him, slowly, drop by drop, and she had been too consumed with hiding her own secret to notice. They reached the edge of the trees, where the pack's protective wards thinned, and the world beyond felt suddenly larger and more dangerous. Corvin stopped and turned her toward an old dead tree standing alone in a clearing, its bare branches reaching up like desperate fingers against the gray sky. "No," Elena whispered, understanding now what he intended. "You cannot leave me out here. It is freezing. I will not survive the night." "That is not my concern," Corvin said, and there was something almost bored in the way he said it, as though her fear meant nothing to him at all. He pulled her toward the tree and began winding the chain around the trunk, securing her wrists so she could not move more than a few inches in any direction. The silver dug deeper into her skin as she struggled, sending sharp pain shooting up her arms. "Corvin," she said, forcing herself to stay calm, even as panic clawed at her chest. "Listen to me. There is something you don't know, something that changes everything." He paused, one hand still holding the chain. What could possibly change anything now? She looked at him. This man she had once considered a loyal member of her mate's inner circle, someone she had trusted enough to share meals with, to laugh with during pack gatherings. Now his face was a stranger's face, hard and unreadable in the fading light. I am carrying Damien's child, she said quietly. I am 7 months along. If you leave me here, you are not only condemning me, you are condemning his son or daughter. The first pup born to an alpha bloodline in this pack in 3 generations. For the briefest moment, something shifted in Corvin's expression. His grip on the chain loosened just slightly, and his eyes flicked down to her stomach, which she now realized her coat had been hiding less effectively than she thought. But whatever flicker of hesitation crossed his face vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by something colder and more determined. That changes nothing, he said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. The Alpha has given his order. I intend to see it carried out. You are lying to yourself if you think this is about loyalty to Damien, Elena said, anger beginning to burn through her fear. This is about something else. What do you gain from this, Corvin? What do you gain from my death, and the death of an innocent child who has done nothing to you? He did not answer. He simply finished securing the chain, testing it once to make sure it would hold, and then stepped back. The Alpha's mate should have been more careful about who she trusted, he said, and there was a strange, bitter edge to his voice now, something that sounded almost like old resentment finally being allowed to surface. Perhaps if you had spent less time securing your place at his side, and more time watching your back, this would not have happened. With that, he turned and walked back toward the tree line, his footprints already beginning to fill with fresh snow. Corvin, Elena called after him, her voice cracking. Corvin, please, think about what you are doing. He did not look back. She watched his shadow disappear into the trees, swallowed by the growing darkness, and then she was alone. Truly alone, chained to a dead tree at the edge of a frozen forest, snow falling steadily around her, the silver in the chains slowly draining what little strength remained in her body. She sank down as far as the chains would allow, pressing her back against the rough bark of the tree, and wrapped her arms as best she could around the swell of her stomach. I'm sorry, she whispered, to the child who could not yet understand her words, but who she hoped could somehow feel her warmth, her fear, her fierce and unwavering love. I'm so sorry. I should have told your father sooner. I should have trusted him with everything. The wind picked up, carrying flakes of snow that stung her cheeks like tiny needles. In the distance, she could hear the faint howl of a wolf, though whether it belonged to a member of her own pack or something wild and unknown, she could not tell. She thought of Damien, not the cold, distant figure who had apparently ordered her exile without a word of explanation, but the man she had fallen in love with 3 years ago, back when he was still learning the weight of leadership, back when his laugh came easily, and his hands were gentle whenever they touched her. She remembered the night he had claimed her as his mate beneath a sky full of stars, promising that nothing would ever come between them. Something had come between them now. Something built entirely of lies. She did not know how long she sat there, drifting in and out of awareness as the cold seeped deeper into her bones. Time became strange, elastic, difficult to measure. At some point she realized her fingers had gone numb. At another point she realized she could barely feel her feet. The child inside her shifted restlessly, as though sensing the danger surrounding them both, and she pressed her palm flat against her stomach, trying to offer whatever comfort she could. Stay strong, she murmured, her voice barely more than a breath now. Stay strong for me. Your father is a good man, I have to believe that. I have to believe he does not know what has been done in his name. Far away, back within the safety of the pack's central lodge, Damien sat alone in his study, staring at a folded piece of parchment that Corvin had presented to him only hours earlier. The parchment contained what appeared to be a detailed account of Elena's supposed meetings with Cale Ashgrove, written in a hand he did not recognize, describing exchanges of information that could only be interpreted as betrayal. He had wanted to refuse to believe it. Every instinct in him had rebelled against the idea that Elena, his mate, the woman whose scent alone could calm the fiercest storm inside him, would ever conspire against the pack she had sworn to protect. But the elders had been present when Corvin brought forward his evidence, and their voices had joined together, insisting that swift action was necessary to preserve the pack's honor and security. He had given the order in anger, in the heat of a moment stretched thin by exhaustion and betrayal, and the crushing weight of leadership. And now, hours later, sitting alone in the growing darkness of his study, a strange unease had begun to settle over him, an unease he could not quite name. Something felt wrong. He told himself it was simply the natural discomfort of having disciplined his own mate, a discomfort any reasonable alpha might feel, even when the punishment was justified. But as the hours passed, the feeling did not fade. If anything, it grew sharper, more insistent, like a splinter buried deep beneath his skin, that refused to be ignored. He rose from his desk and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening forest beyond the lodge, snow falling steadily against the glass. Somewhere out there, at the edge of his territory, Elena was facing the consequences of a crime he was beginning to suspect she had never actually committed. He did not yet know how right that suspicion was. He did not yet know that the woman he loved was chained to a dying tree in the freezing cold, carrying his unborn child, praying that he would somehow find the truth before it was too late. But something deep within him, some ancient thread that connected mated wolves across any distance, had already begun to stir, sensing her pain long before his conscious mind could accept what it meant. The bond between them was not broken, it had only been strained, stretched thin by lies and doubt, and bonds like that, forged in the deepest kind of love, did not simply disappear. They waited, they pulled, they demanded to be heard. And somewhere in the darkness of that study, as snow continued to fall over the frozen border of his territory, Damien felt the first true crack in the wall of anger he had built around his heart, a crack that would soon widen into something he could no longer ignore. Outside, at the edge of the world he ruled, Elena closed her eyes against the cold and thought of stars, of promises made beneath them, and of a child who deserved a chance to know both of its parents. She did not know if that chance would come, but she refused to stop believing it might. The cold no longer felt like cold, it felt like weight, pressing down on Elena's chest, making each breath harder to draw than the last. Her eyelids had grown heavy, and though some distant part of her mind screamed at her to stay awake, to keep moving, to fight the pull of sleep that crept closer with every passing minute, her body had begun to betray her. She thought she heard footsteps. At first she dismissed it as her imagination, a trick played by exhaustion and fear. But the sound came again, closer this time, the crunch of snow beneath careful footsteps, moving with a caution that suggested whoever approached did not want to be heard. "Hello?" She called weakly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Is someone there?" A figure emerged from the trees, not Corvin, not any wolf she recognized from her own pack. A young woman, perhaps no older than 20, dressed in simple traveling clothes, her dark hair pulled back beneath a worn hood. She froze when she saw Elena chained to the tree, her eyes widening in shock. "Oh no," the young woman breathed, rushing forward. "What happened to you? Who did this?" "Please," Elena managed, her strength nearly gone. "The chain. Silver. I cannot break it myself." The young woman knelt beside her, examining the chain with careful hands, taking care not to touch the metal directly. "My name is Ren," she said quickly. "I am traveling through this territory, nothing more. I did not expect to find anyone out here, especially not like this." "Elena," she managed to say. "Please, Ren, I do not have much time. I am with child." Ren's eyes dropped to Elena's stomach, and understanding dawned on her face, followed swiftly by a fierce determination. "Then we do not have a moment to waste." She examined the chain more closely, searching for any weakness, any point where the links might be forced apart. Her hands trembled slightly, whether from cold or urgency Elena could not tell, but she worked with a steady focus that gave Elena a small, desperate flicker of hope. "I need something to pry this apart," Ren muttered, glancing around the clearing. Her eyes landed on a broken branch nearby, thick and sturdy despite the season, and she snatched it up, wedging it between the links of the chain. "This may hurt," Ren warned. "The metal will move against your skin." "Do it," Elena said through gritted teeth. "Please." Ren threw her weight against the branch, using it as a lever, and the chain groaned under the pressure. Elena bit back a cry of pain as the silver shifted against her raw wrists, but she forced herself to stay still, to endure it. focusing every ounce of remaining strength on the thought of her unborn child. The chain did not break. Ren tried again, adjusting her grip, throwing her weight into it with renewed determination. Still, the metal held. "It's too strong," Ren said, breathing hard, frustration creeping into her voice. "I cannot break it alone." Elena felt despair beginning to close in around her, colder even than the wind. She had allowed herself to hope, and now that hope was slipping away as surely as her fading consciousness. "Then go," she said quietly. "Please, Ren. Find help. Anyone. There is a pack territory not far from here, Blackthorn. Find someone there. Tell them what you found. Tell them where I am." Ren hesitated, clearly torn between the instinct to stay and the knowledge that seeking help might be the only way to truly save her. "I do not know if I can find my way back in time," she admitted. "You have to try," Elena said, tears freezing against her cheeks even as they fell. "For my child, if not for me." Ren nodded, her jaw set with determination, and rose to her feet. "I will run as fast as I can. Hold on, Elena. Please hold on." And then she was gone, disappearing into the trees in the direction Elena had pointed, leaving her alone once more in the growing darkness, but this time, with something she had not had before. A thread of hope, however thin. Elena closed her eyes and focused on breathing, on the small movements of the child within her, on anything that might keep her tethered to consciousness a little longer. She thought again of Damien, and this time, instead of anger, she allowed herself to remember the good in him, the man who had once carried her on his back through a summer storm, simply because she had laughed and said she wanted to feel the rain without getting soaked, the man who had sat beside her through long nights when nightmares from her past refused to let her sleep. That man would not have chained her to a tree and left her to die. That man would want to know the truth. She had to believe he would come. Back at the lodge, Damien's unease had grown into something he could no longer dismiss as simple discomfort. He paced the length of his study, his wolf pressing hard against the edges of his control, restless and agitated, in a way he had rarely experienced. Something was wrong. Every instinct screamed it at him now, louder, with each passing minute. A knock came at his door, sharp and urgent. "Enter," he said, and a young pack member stepped inside, her face pale, her hands twisting nervously in front of her. "Alpha," she said, her voice trembling. "My name is Mira. I need to speak with you about something I saw earlier today." Damien turned to face her fully, something in her tone catching his immediate attention. "Go on." "It's about Elena," Mira said, and Damien felt his chest tighten at the mention of her name. "I saw Corvin taking her toward the border. But Alpha, she wasn't fleeing. She was fighting him. She was chained." The room seemed to tilt around Damien for a brief, dizzying moment. "Chained," he repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "I did not understand what I was seeing at first," Mira continued quickly, clearly frightened but determined to finish what she had come to say. "I thought perhaps it was part of an escort, something official. But the way she struggled, the way he refused to listen to her, it did not look right. I have been trying to work up the courage to tell you for hours." Damien's mind raced back through the events of the day, through the parchment Corvin had presented, through the elder's insistence on swift punishment. He thought of the strange, gnawing unease that had settled over him since giving the order, the way his wolf had refused to be calmed, no matter how he tried to justify his decision. He had been manipulated. He understood that now with a clarity that felt like ice water thrown across his face. Someone had presented him with fabricated evidence, had pushed him toward a decision in a moment of exhaustion and anger, and he had allowed it, because some part of him, poisoned by weeks of subtle suggestion, had been primed to believe it. "Where is Corvin now?" Damien demanded. "I do not know, Alpha," Mira said. "I have not seen him since he returned from the border alone." Damien was already moving, striding toward the door, his heart pounding with a mixture of fury and gut-wrenching fear. "Gather the search party," he ordered, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. "Now, we ride for the border immediately." As he moved through the halls of the lodge, shouting orders, gathering his most trusted wolves, the bond between himself and Elena continued to pulse within him, growing weaker with every passing minute, like a candle flame struggling against a relentless wind. He had felt her pain earlier and dismissed it. He would not make that mistake again. Whatever it took, whatever distance he had to cover, whatever truth he had to face about his own failure to trust the woman he loved, he would reach her in time. He had to believe that. The alternative was something he refused to allow himself to consider. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the forest in white, indifferent to the desperate race now beginning on both sides of the border, indifferent to the fragile life clinging to consciousness beneath the branches of a dead and ancient tree. Somewhere between the lodge and the clearing, a young woman named Wren ran as fast as her legs could carry her, praying she would not be too late. And somewhere within that clearing, Elena held on, one shallow breath at a time, her hand resting protectively over the small life she had sworn to protect no matter the cost. The forest blurred past in streaks of white and black as Damien ran, faster than he had ever run in his life, his wolf form tearing through the snow with a desperate hunger for speed. Behind him came a dozen of his most trusted pack members, their paws thundering against the frozen ground, their breath rising in clouds against the darkening sky. He could feel the bond weakening with every stride, a thread pulled thinner and thinner, threatening to snap entirely. He pushed himself harder, refusing to let his mind consider what that would mean. A shape appeared ahead of them on the trail, stumbling through the snow, wrapped in a traveling cloak. Damien slowed just enough to recognize that it was not a threat, but a young woman, gasping for breath, clearly exhausted from running. He shifted back to his human form long enough to speak, one of his pack members quickly draping a spare cloak over his shoulders. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What are you doing on Blackthorn land?" "My name is Wren," she gasped, doubling over with her hands on her knees. "I was traveling through when I found a woman chained to a tree at the border. She said her name was Elena. She said she was carrying a child. I tried to break the chain, but I could not do it alone. I was running for help." Relief and terror collided in Damien's chest, with such force that for a moment he could not speak. "Show me," he finally managed. "Now." Wren nodded, straightening despite her exhaustion, and turned to lead them back the way she had come. Damien shifted again, falling into an easy, powerful stride beside her, forcing himself to match his pace to hers, even as every instinct screamed at him to run ahead alone. "How long ago did you find her?" he asked, his wolf's voice a low growl even in human speech. "Perhaps half an hour," Wren said, "maybe less. She was fading fast when I left her. I am sorry. I could not free her. The chain was too strong." "Silver," Damien said grimly. "It would not have mattered how strong you were." They ran together through the darkening forest, the rest of the pack falling into formation around them, alert for any sign of danger. Damien's mind raced through everything Mira had told him, everything Wren now confirmed, piecing together a picture of betrayal so deep it made his blood run cold with fury. Corvin had not acted alone in creating the false evidence. Someone had helped him craft a story convincing enough to fool the elders, convincing enough to override Damien's own instincts about the woman he loved. And whoever that someone was, they had wanted Elena gone badly enough to risk exposure, badly enough to attempt something as permanent as leaving her to freeze at the border of the territory. He thought of Cale Ashgrove, the name that had appeared throughout Corvin's fabricated account. Redthorn Pack had never been an ally to Blackthorn, not truly, not since the old border disputes that had poisoned relations between the two territories for generations. If Redthorn had a hand in this, if they had seen an opportunity to weaken Blackthorn by removing its alpha's mate and unborn heir, the implications went far beyond a single act of cruelty. This was an attack, not against Elena alone, but against the future of his entire pack. "There," Wren said suddenly, pointing ahead through the trees. "The clearing is just beyond those pines." Damien's heart seized in his chest. He surged forward, no longer able to hold himself back, his powerful legs eating up the remaining distance in seconds. He burst into the clearing and skidded to a stop, his eyes finding the dead tree, the chains wrapped around its trunk, and the still form slumped against it, barely visible beneath a thin dusting of fresh snow. "Elena," he breathed, shifting back to his human form instantly, stumbling through the snow toward her. "Elena, I'm here." She did not respond. Her eyes were closed, her skin an alarming shade of pale, her lips tinged with blue. For one horrifying moment, Damien feared he was too late, that the bond he had felt weakening had finally, irrevocably broken. He pressed his fingers to her throat, searching desperately for a pulse, and felt a faint, fluttering beat beneath his fingertips. Relief crashed through him so powerfully, his knees nearly buckled. "She's alive," he called to his pack members, who had gathered at the edge of the clearing, giving him space, but ready to act at his command. "Get the healers ready. We need to move fast." He turned his attention to the chains, examining the silver links wrapped around her wrists. The metal had burned deep grooves into her skin, and even now, without the strength of her wolf to protect her, the silver continued its slow, cruel work. "I need something to break this," he said, his voice tight with restrained fury. One of his pack members, a broad-shouldered wolf named Garrick, stepped forward, offering a heavy iron tool he had grabbed from the lodge's stores before they left, anticipating exactly this need. Damien took it without hesitation, wedging it into the chain and throwing his full strength against it. Unlike Ren, who had fought against the silver with nothing but a tree branch and raw determination, Damien possessed the strength of a full-grown alpha wolf, and the chain groaned, then cracked, then finally gave way beneath the force of his effort. He gathered Elena into his arms immediately, pulling her free from the last of the metal, and felt his heart clench painfully at how light she felt, how cold her skin was against his own. "Stay with me," he murmured, pressing his lips to her forehead, wrapping his own cloak tightly around her. "Please, Elena, stay with me. I'm sorry. I should have trusted you. I should have listened." Her eyelids fluttered faintly, and for one brief, precious moment, her eyes opened just enough to find his face. "Damien," she whispered, so quietly he almost missed it over the wind. "I'm here," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm here now. I'm not letting you go." "The baby," she managed to say, her hand moving weakly toward her stomach. "Please, save the baby." "I will save you both," he promised, his voice fierce with determination. "I swear it." He rose to his feet, cradling her carefully against his chest, and turned to his waiting pack. "We move now. Fastest route back to the lodge. Garrick, send word ahead. Tell the healers to prepare everything they have." Garrick nodded, and shifted instantly, tearing off through the trees, at a speed that would have him back at the lodge, well before the rest of the group. As Damien began the journey back, carrying Elena as gently and as quickly as he could manage, Ren fell into step beside him, her earlier exhaustion apparently forgotten in the urgency of the moment. "Will she survive?" Ren asked quietly. "She has to," Damien said, his jaw tight. "I refuse to accept anything else." They moved through the forest with all the speed the pack could manage, Damien's arms never loosening their protective hold on Elena, his eyes constantly checking her face for any sign of continued life, his ears straining to catch the faint sound of her breathing over the wind. Behind them, unnoticed in the chaos of the rescue, a shadow moved through the trees on the opposite side of the border, watching the scene unfold with narrowed eyes before slipping away into the darkness, already planning his next move. Corvin had not gone far, and he had not acted alone. The lodge came into view through the trees, its windows glowing warm against the darkness, and Damien had never been more grateful for the sight of home. Garrick had done his work well. As they approached, a group of healers rushed out to meet them, carrying blankets and medicines, their faces set with grim determination. "Bring her inside, quickly," said an older woman named Nadia, the pack's most experienced healer, her sharp eyes assessing Elena's condition even as she spoke. "She is severely hypothermic. We need to warm her carefully. Too fast and the shock could be dangerous, especially in her condition." "You know about the child?" Damien asked, following closely as they moved through the lodge toward the healing chambers. "Garrick told us everything he knew," Nadia said briskly. "Now, Alpha, I need you to let us work. Your presence is welcome, but you must not interfere with what needs to be done." Damien laid Elena down carefully on the bed the healers had prepared, his hands lingering on hers for a moment longer than necessary before he forced himself to step back. Nadia and two other healers moved in immediately, working with quick, practiced efficiency, wrapping Elena in warmed blankets, checking her pulse, listening carefully for any sign of distress from the child she carried. "Her pulse is weak but steady," Nadia reported after several tense minutes. "We need to raise her body temperature slowly. I am going to need everyone who is not assisting to leave the room." Damien hesitated, every instinct rebelling against the idea of leaving her side. but he understood the necessity of it. He nodded once, sharply, and stepped back toward the door. "Send word the moment there is any change," he said. "Any change at all." "Of course, Alpha," Nadia said, already turning her attention back to her patient. Damien stepped out into the hallway, where Ren stood waiting, still wrapped in her borrowed cloak, looking uncertain about her place in all of this chaos. "Thank you," Damien said, turning to her with genuine gratitude. "If you had not found her, if you had not come for help, I do not know what would have happened." "I only did what anyone would have done," Ren said quietly. "Not everyone would have run through unfamiliar territory in the freezing cold to save a stranger," Damien said. "You have my gratitude, and the gratitude of this pack. You are welcome to stay here as long as you wish, and I will see that you are rewarded for your courage." Ren nodded, clearly moved by the offer, though exhaustion was quickly catching up with her. One of the pack members guided her toward a room where she could rest and warm herself, leaving Damien alone in the hallway with his thoughts. His mind turned immediately to Corvin. Wherever the beta had gone after leaving Elena at the border, Damien intended to find him and demand answers. But first, he needed to understand the full scope of the betrayal, and for that, he needed evidence that could not be disputed. He summoned Mira again, along with two of his most trusted enforcers, a stern-faced woman named Nadia's daughter Leora, and a quiet, observant man named Finn, who had long served as one of Damien's personal guards. "I want Corvin found," Damien said, his voice hard with barely controlled anger. "I want to know where he has gone, who he has spoken to, and what he intended to do next. Search his quarters. Search everywhere he might have hidden correspondence." Finn and Leora nodded and departed immediately, moving with the quiet efficiency of wolves who understood the gravity of the situation. While they searched, Damien returned to pacing outside the healing chamber, unable to sit still, unable to focus on anything but the sounds coming from within, the murmured instructions between healers, the occasional soft groan that told him Elena remained, at the very least, alive. An hour passed, then another. Damien's legs ached from pacing, his mind exhausted from replaying every decision that had led to this moment, every warning sign he had missed, every moment he should have trusted his mate over the whispered doubts planted by a man he had once considered a friend. Finally, Leora returned, her expression grim, holding several pieces of parchment in her hands. "Alpha, we found something," she said, hidden beneath the floorboards in Corvin's quarters. Letters. Correspondence between Corvin and someone from Redthorn territory. Damien took the letters with tense fingers, scanning the contents quickly, his jaw tightening with each line he read. The letters made clear what he had begun to suspect. Corvin had been working with Cale Ashgrove for months, exchanging information about Blackthorn's defenses, its resources, its vulnerabilities. In exchange, Cale had promised Corvin something Damien had not anticipated: support in claiming leadership of Blackthorn, should the current Alpha line fail to produce an heir. Damien felt something cold and furious settle in his chest as the full picture came into focus. Corvin had never simply resented Elena's position at his side. He had wanted the Alpha seat for himself, and he had recognized that the surest way to weaken Damien's claim was to eliminate any chance of an heir. When he had somehow learned of Elena's pregnancy, likely through careless words overheard or observed changes in her behavior, he had seen an opportunity, and he had seized it with ruthless efficiency, fabricating evidence of betrayal convincing enough to secure the Elder's support for her exile. "Where is he now?" Damien demanded. "We believe he is attempting to cross into Redthorn territory," Leora said. "Finn is tracking him as we speak, along with a small team. He will not get far, Alpha. Finn is the best tracker we have." Damien nodded, satisfaction mixing with his lingering fury. "Good. I want him brought back alive. He will answer for what he has done, before the Elders, before the entire pack." As Leora departed to coordinate with Finn's team, the door to the healing chamber finally opened, and Nadia stepped out, her expression difficult to read. "Alpha," she said, and Damien's heart nearly stopped in his chest. "Elena's temperature has stabilized. She is out of immediate danger." The relief that flooded through Damien was so overwhelming, he had to brace himself against the wall for a moment, his eyes closing as he absorbed the news. "And the child?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nadia's expression softened slightly. "We have detected a heartbeat. Strong, steady. The child appears to have weathered the ordeal remarkably well, though we will need to continue monitoring closely over the coming days to be certain. Damien felt tears burn at the corners of his eyes, tears he made no effort to hide. Can I see her? She is sleeping now, Nadia said. Her body needs rest to recover fully. But yes, Alpha, you may sit with her, quietly, if you wish. Damien did not need to be told twice. He moved past Nadia into the healing chamber, where Elena lay beneath layers of warm blankets, her color returning slowly, her breathing steady and even. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, taking her hand carefully in his own, mindful of the raw wounds still healing across her wrists. I am so sorry, he murmured, pressing his lips gently to her knuckles. I let my fear and my anger override everything I know to be true about you. I should have trusted our bond over lies crafted by a man consumed by his own ambition. I will spend the rest of my life making this right, if you will allow me the chance. Elena did not stir, lost in the deep, healing sleep her body desperately needed, but Damien remained beside her through the night, his hand never leaving hers, his heart finally beginning to settle after hours of unbearable fear. Outside, in the dark forests beyond the lodge, Finn and his team closed in on their target, following a trail of fresh footprints leading toward the border with Redthorn territory, where a desperate and increasingly cornered Corvin was about to discover that his carefully laid plans had begun to unravel entirely. Finn moved through the darkness with the silent precision of a wolf who had spent years perfecting the art of the hunt. Beside him, 3 other members of Blackthorn's enforcement team fanned out in a wide arc, following the fresh trail of footprints that led steadily toward the boundary separating their territory from Redthorn land. The snow had slowed the fleeing beta considerably, and Finn could see from the depth and spacing of the prints that Corvin was tiring, his pace slowing with each passing mile. Good, that would make this easier. He is close, Finn murmured to Leora, who had rejoined the group after delivering the evidence to Damien. No more than a few minutes ahead. They pressed forward, moving faster now, closing the distance with practiced efficiency. Through the trees, Finn caught the first glimpse of movement, a dark shape struggling through deep snow, glancing repeatedly over his shoulder, as though sensing pursuit, but unable to identify its source. Now, Finn said quietly, and the team surged forward together. Corvin heard them at the last moment, spinning around with wide, panicked eyes, as 4 wolves emerged from the trees around him, cutting off any possible route of escape. He backed away, his hands raised, though there was nowhere left for him to run. Finn, Corvin said, forcing a note of authority into his voice that did not match the fear evident in his eyes. Stand down. I am still your beta. You answer to me. Not anymore, Finn said coldly, shifting back to his human form, the others following his lead. The Alpha knows what you did. We found your letters, Corvin. We know about Redthorn. We know about Kale Ashgrove. Corvin's face went pale, and for a moment, something like genuine fear flickered across his features before hardening back into desperate defiance. You do not understand what is at stake here, he said quickly. The Blackthorn line has grown weak. Damien's leadership has made us vulnerable. I was trying to protect this pack, to ensure strong leadership for the future. By betraying your Alpha's mate to freezing cold and near death? Leora demanded, stepping forward with barely contained fury. By conspiring with a rival pack to weaken us from within. That is not protection, Corvin. That is treason. She was carrying no proof of loyalty to this pack, Corvin snapped, some of his earlier composure cracking under the pressure. Her death would have been unfortunate, yes, but necessary. A weak heir born to questionable circumstances would only have caused further instability. Her death, and the death of an innocent child, Finn said, his voice low and dangerous. You speak of necessity as though you have any right to make that judgment. You do not. Only the Alpha holds that authority, and he never sanctioned what you did. You deceived him, you manufactured false evidence to secure his cooperation, and then you exceeded even the punishment he believed he was ordering. Corvin's eyes darted between the surrounding wolves, searching desperately for any weakness, any opening he might exploit. Finding none, his shoulders slumped slightly, though the defiant set of his jaw remained. What happens now? He asked quietly. Now you come with us, Finn said. The Alpha will decide your fate, and I suspect, given everything you have done, you should prepare yourself for very little mercy. They bound his hands, not with silver, for even in his fury, Damien had given explicit instructions that Corvin was not to be tortured or injured beyond what was necessary to secure him, and began the long walk back toward the lodge. Corvin remained silent for most of the journey, his earlier bravado having faded entirely, replaced by the sullen resignation of a man who understood his schemes had utterly collapsed. As they crossed back onto Blackthorn territory, Finn allowed himself a brief moment of relief. The most immediate threat had been contained, but he understood, as did the rest of the team, that this was far from over. Corvin had not acted entirely alone, and Redthorn's involvement in this conspiracy raised troubling questions about what might come next, now that their plan had failed so completely. Back at the lodge, Elena's condition continued to improve throughout the following day. She woke briefly in the early morning hours, disoriented and confused, before Damien's gentle voice and steady presence helped ground her back into awareness. "Damien," she murmured, her eyes finding his face in the dim light of the healing chamber. "You came for me." "I will always come for you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am so sorry it took me so long to see the truth. I should never have doubted you, not for a single moment." "You were deceived," she said softly, though there was no accusation in her tone, only understanding. "Corvin planned this carefully. He knew exactly what evidence would convince you." "That is no excuse," Damien said firmly. "I am your mate. I should have trusted the bond between us over anything else, no matter how convincing the lies appeared. I failed you, Elena, and I failed our child. I will spend the rest of my life earning back the trust I broke." Elena reached up weakly, brushing her fingers against his cheek, and he leaned into the touch, closing his eyes briefly. "We will rebuild this together," she said. "But Damien, I need to know. Is Corvin found? Has he been stopped?" "He has been captured," Damien confirmed. "Finn's team brought him back, just this morning. He will face the elders and answer for everything he has done, including his connection to Redthorn Pack." Elena's expression darkened at the mention of Redthorn. "Then this is not over," she said quietly. "If Cale Ashgrove was involved, Redthorn may not simply accept that their plan has failed." Damien's jaw tightened, the same concern already weighing heavily on his own mind. "I know," he admitted. "But right now, my priority is your recovery, and the safety of our child. Whatever comes from Redthorn, we will face it when it arrives. For now, I need you to rest, to heal, to focus on nothing but getting stronger." Elena managed a faint smile, though exhaustion pulled heavily at her features. "You always did try to protect me from everything, even when I told you I did not need protecting." "Some habits are hard to break," Damien said, a small, tired smile finally breaking through his own worry. "Especially when it comes to you." She drifted back into sleep soon after, her body still demanding rest to recover fully from the ordeal she had endured. Damien remained at her side through the following days, only leaving briefly to attend to the most urgent matters of pack business, always returning as quickly as his responsibilities allowed. Meanwhile, in a secure chamber deep within the lodge, Corvin sat in silence, awaiting the judgment that awaited him. While beyond the borders of Blackthorn territory, whispers began to spread through Redthorn Pack about a plan that had failed, and about an alpha who now understood exactly the nature of the threat he faced. The trial, when it came, would reveal secrets that had remained hidden for far longer than anyone within Blackthorn had realized. Secrets that would test the strength of the pack, the resolve of its alpha, and the fragile, newly mended trust between Damien and the mate he had so nearly lost forever. The great hall of the Blackthorn Lodge had not seen a formal trial in over a decade, but as the pack gathered beneath its high wooden beams, the weight of the occasion pressed heavily on everyone present. Damien sat at the head of the hall, his expression carved from stone, while the elders arranged themselves along one side of the room, their faces grave with the seriousness of what they were about to hear. Elena, still weak but insistent on being present, sat beside Damien, wrapped warmly against the lingering chill that had not fully left her bones. Her presence alone sent a clear message throughout the hall. She had survived. Whatever Corvin had intended, he had failed. Corvin was led into the hall in chains, though these were ordinary iron, not silver, a small mercy that Damien had insisted upon despite his fury. Corvin's head remained lowered as he was brought before the assembled pack, though his shoulders carried none of the humility one might expect from a man facing judgment for his crimes. "Corvin of Blackthorn," Damien said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. You stand accused of fabricating evidence against your Alpha's mate, of conspiring to exile her under false pretenses, and of leaving her chained at the border to face certain death, along with the child she carried. You further stand accused of conspiring with Redthorn Pack against the interests of your own territory. How do you answer these charges? Corvin lifted his head slowly, meeting Damien's gaze with an expression that held no remorse, only a kind of weary resignation. I do not deny what I did, he said, but I will not stand here and pretend it was without cause. A murmur rippled through the gathered pack, and Damien raised a hand for silence before gesturing for Corvin to continue. Speak then, Damien said. Let the pack hear your reasoning, if reasoning is truly what drove you to such extremes. Corvin straightened, and for the first time, something like genuine conviction entered his voice. You became Alpha too young, he said, addressing Damien directly. You were thrust into leadership before you were ready, and I watched you struggle under that weight for years. I watched you make decisions driven by emotion rather than strategy. I believed, and I still believe, that this pack needs stronger leadership than you have provided. So you decided to manufacture that leadership yourself, Damien said coldly, by eliminating my mate and my unborn child, and by selling secrets to a rival pack in exchange for their support. Cale Ashgrove approached me, Corvin admitted. He recognized the same weaknesses I did. He offered support, resources, an alliance that would have strengthened Blackthorn's position, if only the current leadership were replaced with someone more capable. You mean yourself, Elena said, her voice weak but steady, cutting through the tension in the hall. You believed yourself more capable than the man who has led this pack through 3 difficult winters, who has negotiated peace with 2 neighboring territories, who has cared for every member of this pack, as though they were his own family. You believed yourself more capable, and so you were willing to murder an innocent child to prove it. Corvin's jaw tightened, but he did not look away from her. I did not believe it would come to that, he said, though the words rang hollow even to Damien's ears. I believed the cold would drive you to admit weakness, to leave the territory on your own before the situation became fatal. That is a lie, Damien said sharply. You knew exactly what you were doing when you chained her with silver, when you left her alone in freezing temperatures as night fell. You intended for her to die, Corvin. Do not insult this pack further by pretending otherwise. Silence fell over the hall, heavy and absolute. Corvin said nothing more, his earlier conviction crumbling under the weight of Damien's accusation, the truth of his intentions laid bare before the entire pack. One of the elders, an elderly woman named Callum's grandmother who had served the pack for over 4 decades, rose slowly to her feet. The evidence against you is undeniable, she said, her voice carrying the authority of long years of service. Your correspondence with Redthorn Pack constitutes clear treason. Your actions against the Alpha's mate constitute attempted murder, twice over, given the life of the unborn child you sought to end. There is only one judgment this council can render. Damien rose to his feet, his expression grim but resolute. Corvin, for your crimes against this pack, against my mate, and against my child, you are stripped of your title as Beta, effective immediately. You are exiled from Blackthorn territory, permanently, with no possibility of return. Should you be found within our borders again, you will be treated as an enemy of this pack, and dealt with accordingly. Corvin's face paled at the severity of the judgment, though he made no protest, seeming to understand that any argument would only worsen his fate. He was led from the hall in silence, his chains removed at the border, only after he had been escorted well beyond Blackthorn territory, left to make his own way, in a world that no longer offered him the power or position he had so desperately sought. As the hall began to empty, Damien turned to Elena, taking her hand gently in his own. It is done, he said quietly. He can no longer hurt you, or our child. But Redthorn remains, Elena said, her expression troubled despite the relief evident in her eyes. Cale Ashgrove will not simply accept the failure of his plan without consequence. Damien nodded grimly, having already considered the same concern. I have already sent word to strengthen our border patrols, he said, and I intend to send a formal message to Redthorn's Alpha, informing him of what his emissary has done. If Redthorn's leadership was unaware of Cale's actions, they will need to answer for his conduct. If they were aware, and complicit, Then we will know exactly where we stand with our neighbors. Elena leaned against him, exhaustion still weighing heavily on her despite the relief of seeing justice served. I am frightened, she admitted quietly. Not for myself, but for our child. I do not want this danger to follow us into their earliest days. Damien wrapped his arms around her carefully, mindful of her continued recovery, and pressed a gentle kiss to the top of her head. I will not allow that to happen, he said, his voice fierce with determination. Whatever threat Redthorn poses, we will face it together, as we should have faced everything from the beginning. I have learned my lesson, Elena. I will never again let doubt or manipulation come between us. In the days that followed, word spread quickly throughout Blackthorn territory of Corvin's betrayal and exile, and the pack rallied around their alpha and his mate with renewed loyalty and determination. Preparations began in earnest to strengthen their defenses, anticipating whatever response might come from Redthorn territory, while Elena continued her slow recovery under the watchful care of Nadia and her healers. The bond between Damien and Elena, though tested severely by the events of recent days, began to heal alongside her physical wounds, each conversation, each quiet moment together, rebuilding the trust that had been so nearly shattered. But as autumn deepened into the harshest days of winter, a message arrived at the Blackthorn border that would test that fragile trust once more, and reveal that the danger from Redthorn had only just begun. The messenger arrived at dusk, a lone Redthorn wolf, carrying a sealed letter bearing the mark of their alpha, requesting an urgent meeting at the border between the two territories. Damien read the letter twice before passing it to Elena, his expression unreadable. They want to talk, he said. Alpha to alpha, at the border, 3 days from now. Do you trust it? Elena asked, her hand resting protectively over her rounded stomach, now full term and heavy, with the child who could arrive at any moment. I do not trust Redthorn, Damien admitted, but I trust that ignoring this message would be more dangerous than answering it. If their alpha wishes to distance himself from Cale Ashgrove's actions, this meeting gives him the opportunity to do so publicly. If he refuses that opportunity, we will know exactly where things stand. 3 days later, Damien stood at the border with a small contingent of his most trusted wolves, Finn and Leora among them, watching as a group approached from the Redthorn side of the territory line. At their head walked an older wolf with graying hair and sharp, calculating eyes, flanked by several enforcers, though notably, Cale Ashgrove was nowhere among them. Alpha Damien, the Redthorn leader said, inclining his head in formal greeting. I am Alpha Garrick Thorn, of Redthorn. I have come to address the grave matter of my former emissary's conduct. Former emissary, Damien repeated, his tone carefully neutral despite the tension coiled tightly in his chest. Cale Ashgrove acted entirely without my knowledge or sanction, Garrick Thorn said firmly. When word reached me of his conspiracy with your beta, I had him detained immediately. He will face judgment within my own territory for actions that could have dragged both our packs into unnecessary and costly conflict. Damien studied the older alpha carefully, searching for any sign of deception, but found only what appeared to be genuine concern and diplomatic caution. Your emissary nearly cost me my mate and my unborn child, he said, his voice hardening. That is not a matter I can dismiss, simply because you claim ignorance. I do not ask you to dismiss it, Garrick Thorn said. I ask only that you understand Redthorn as a whole did not sanction this treachery. I offer full reparations, whatever you deem appropriate, and my personal guarantee that Cale Ashgrove will never again hold any position of influence within my territory. The negotiations that followed were tense but ultimately productive, with Garrick Thorn offering concessions on long-standing border disputes, resources, and future cooperation that went far beyond what Damien had anticipated. By the time the meeting concluded, a fragile but genuine peace had been established between the two territories, built on the foundation of shared condemnation for the treachery that had nearly cost so much. As Damien made his way back toward the lodge, relief washed through him at having navigated the confrontation without conflict, though he remained cautiously aware that trust between the two packs would need to be rebuilt slowly, over time. He arrived back at the lodge to find the corridors filled with a different kind of urgency entirely. Alpha, Nadia called, hurrying toward him with an expression that mixed excitement and focused determination. Elena's time has come. The child is arriving. Damien felt his heart leap into his throat, all thoughts of border negotiations and political maneuvering vanishing instantly. He rushed toward the birthing chamber, where Elena's voice, strained but strong, could already be heard through the closed door. "Can I go in?" he asked Nadia urgently. "Yes," Nadia said, allowing a small smile despite the seriousness of the moment. "She has been asking for you." Damien entered the chamber, to find Elena propped up among a nest of blankets, her face flushed with effort, but her eyes bright and determined when they found his. He crossed the room immediately, taking her hand, offering his strength for whatever remained ahead. "You made it," she said, managing a breathless laugh despite the pain evident on her features. "How did the meeting go?" "We can discuss politics later," Damien said, pressing a firm kiss to her forehead. "Right now, I am here for you, and for our child." The hours that followed tested both of them in ways entirely different from the trials they had already faced, but this time, they faced it together, side by side, exactly as it should have been from the beginning. Damien remained at Elena's side throughout, offering steady support, murmuring encouragement, refusing to leave even when Nadia gently suggested he might wish to wait outside. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to creep through the chamber windows, a small, powerful cry filled the room, and Nadia lifted a healthy, squirming infant into view. "A daughter," Nadia announced, her voice thick with emotion. Strong, healthy, and remarkably fierce already, from the sound of things. Damien felt tears streaming freely down his face, as he watched Nadia place the newborn gently into Elena's exhausted but joyful arms. He moved closer, gazing down at his daughter for the first time, overwhelmed by a love so immediate and consuming, it left him nearly speechless. "She is perfect," he finally managed, his voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely perfect." "She fought hard to be here," Elena said softly, gazing down at their daughter with fierce, protective love, "just as we fought to bring her safely into this world." Word spread quickly throughout the pack, and within hours, the entire lodge buzzed with joyful celebration. The first alpha-blooded child born to Blackthorn in 3 generations had arrived, healthy and strong, despite every attempt to prevent her existence. The pack gathered outside the lodge, howling in unified celebration that echoed through the surrounding forest, a sound of triumph and hope that carried far beyond their borders. In the weeks that followed, as Elena recovered fully, and their daughter, whom they named Nova, grew stronger each day, the bond between Damien and Elena deepened into something even more profound than what had existed before the crisis that had nearly torn them apart. Damien made a solemn vow, renewed daily through his actions rather than simply his words, never again to allow doubt or manipulation to come between himself and the woman he loved. Elena, for her part, found her voice within the pack strengthened rather than diminished by the trials she had endured. The elders, having witnessed her resilience and the depth of loyalty she commanded from the pack members who had rallied so fiercely in her defense, formally recognized her not merely as the Alpha's mate, but as Luna of Blackthorn, a title carrying its own authority and respect. Peace with Redthorn held, cautious but genuine, strengthened by trade agreements and mutual cooperation that benefited both territories. Cale Ashgrove faced his own judgment within Redthorn's borders, stripped of all position and influence, while Corvin, wherever his exile had taken him, was never heard from again within Blackthorn lands. On a quiet evening many months later, Damien stood on the balcony of the lodge, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Elena beside him, with their daughter cradled contentedly in her arms. He wrapped his arm around his mate, pulling her close, marveling at how close they had come to losing everything, and how much stronger they had become for having survived it together. "I used to believe strength meant never showing doubt," Damien said quietly, watching Nova's small hand curl around Elena's finger. "I understand now that real strength means trusting the ones you love, even when everything around you suggests otherwise." Elena leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder, watching the last light of day fade into the gentle darkness of evening. "We found our way back to each other," she said softly. "That is what matters most now." Below them, the pack continued its evening routines, unaware of the quiet, profound moment shared between their Alpha and Luna, unaware of how close their future had come to being stolen entirely by lies and betrayal. But the pack was strong, united by the trials they had weathered together, and as Nova drifted into peaceful sleep in her mother's arms, the future of Blackthorn stretched ahead, bright and full of promise, built on a foundation finally strong enough to withstand whatever challenges still lay ahead. The border where Elena had once faced certain death now stood simply as a quiet stretch of forest, marked only by the memory of what had nearly been lost, and by the enduring strength of a bond that had, in the end, proven far more powerful than any lie designed to break it.